What happens when the fairy tale shatters? For Charlotte Hayes. 7 months pregnant and married to a millionaire. It happened in the middle of a Michelin star restaurant. Her husband, Sebastian Croft, didn't just walk out on their marriage. He walked out on the bill, leaving her humiliated and holding a 4-figure check. He thought he could break her, discard her like one of his disposable assets. But he made one catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot who his mother was. Before the sun rose the next day, it wasn't a lawyer Charlotte called. It was the one woman Sebastian never expected his own mother. And she wasn't offering condolences. She was ready to file charges. This is the story of how a mother's love for justice outweighed her love for her son. The weight of the crystal water glass felt heavier than usual in Charlotte Hayes' hand. Its meticulously etched surface, cool against her skin, was a small solid thing in a world that had begun to feel terrifyingly fluid. Across the starched white linen of the table at Aurelia, one of New York's most obscenely expensive restaurants, her husband, Sebastian Croft, smiled. It was the smile he used for magazine covers and fawning investors. A brilliant predatory flash of white that never quite reached his steel blue eyes. To us, he said, raising his own glass of what was likely a $900 bottle of Bordeaux. And to new beginnings. Charlotte, 7 months pregnant, mirrored the gesture with her water. New beginnings, she echoed the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She tried to locate the man she had fallen in love with in the chiseled, impassive face opposite her. 3 years ago, he was the charismatic tech mogul who had swept her off her feet, a whirlwind of helicopter dates, private gallery viewings, and a genuine infectious laugh that seemed to fill every room. She, an up-and-coming interior designer, had been captivated not by his wealth, but by his apparent passion for life, for building things for her. Now the passion was gone, replaced by a chillingly precise form of control. It had been a slow erosion. First came the comments about her friends, whom he deemed unambitious. Then came the suggestions about her career, which he felt was a cute hobby that distracted from her real responsibilities as Mrs. Sebastian Croft. Soon her credit cards were replaced with a single joint account card that sent an itemized alert to his phone with every purchase. He called it financial transparency. She knew it was a leash. The pregnancy had been her last desperate hope. A baby she had thought would surely reawaken the man she loved. It would give them a shared purpose, a bond that his burgeoning empire couldn't sever. For a while it seemed to work. He'd been attentive, even tender placing a hand on her growing belly and whispering plans for the nursery in their cavernous Fifth Avenue penthouse. But in the last month, a new coldness had set in, more profound than ever before. He'd become distant, his nights spent at the office growing more frequent. Whispers from the tightly knit circle of the city's elite had reached her whispers of a new protégé at his company, a sharp-tongued, raven-haired woman named Cassandra Thorne. Sebastian had dismissed it as corporate jealousy. Tonight was supposed to be the reset. He had announced it this morning, his voice smooth and final. "We need a proper date night, Lottie. Just you and me. We'll go to Aurelia. We need to talk." And so they talked. Or rather, he did. He spoke of market projections of a new acquisition of his own brilliance. He barely asked about the baby, a fact that sent a sliver of ice through Charlotte's veins. She ate her seared scallops in near silence, the baby kicking against her ribs as if sensing its mother's distress. "You've been quiet tonight," Sebastian finally observed, dabbing his lips with a napkin. He leaned forward, the smile fading, replaced by a look of cold assessment. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm fine, Sebastian. Just thinking." About what? The question was. Sharp an interrogation. Charlotte took a deep breath, deciding to finally voice the fear that had been strangling her for weeks. About us. About what you meant by new beginnings. I was hoping it meant, a renewed focus on our family. On the baby. Sebastian leaned back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He swirled the wine in his glass, watching the crimson liquid cling to the sides. The baby, of course. The Croft heir. That's a very important role. He looked at her, but his gaze was distant, as if she were a line item on a balance sheet. But a child doesn't fix foundational issues, Charlotte. You know that. What foundational issues? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Your discontentment. Your unhappiness, he said, framing it as her failing. A man in my position needs a partner, not a liability. He needs someone who adds value, who understands the mission. Lately, I feel like I'm managing two enterprises, my company and your emotions. Each word was a perfectly polished stone thrown with devastating accuracy. He was making this her fault. The loneliness, the isolation, the fear. It was all her discontentment. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she fought them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of him. I am not a liability, Sebastian. I am your wife, and I am carrying your child. He sighed, a theatrical display of exhaustion. And I've provided for you, lavishly. You live in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. You wear clothes that cost more than most people's cars. You wanted for nothing. I wanted you. The words burst out louder than she intended, causing a nearby table to glance over. She lowered her voice, a hot wave of shame washing over her. I wanted a husband, not a benefactor. Sebastian's face hardened into a mask of utter indifference. This was it. This was the moment the axe fell. That unfortunately is a commodity I'm no longer able to provide, he said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. He reached into his jacket and pulled out not his wallet, but a single crisp envelope. He slid it across the table. It was thick, heavy with legal documents. What is this? Charlotte whispered, her hand hovering over it, afraid to touch it. That's my version of a new beginning, he said. It's a separation agreement. A very, very generous one, I might add. It contains the keys to a new apartment, a very nice one, fully furnished, and the details of a trust for the child. You'll be well taken care of, provided you sign it. No fuss, no lawyers, no mess. The world tilted. The distant chatter of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. He was divorcing her. Here. Now. You're leaving me. I'm giving you an exit ramp, Charlotte, he corrected. A clean break. This marriage was a mistake, a miscalculation on my part. I'm correcting it. He stood up, straightening his bespoke suit jacket. He looked down at her, his pregnant wife, with the detached pity one might show a stray dog. The bill is on its way. Consider it a final severance package, he said, his lips twisting into that horrific smile again. I've already moved my personal effects from the penthouse. My driver is waiting. Don't try to contact me. My lawyer will be in touch if you unwisely choose to contest this. And then he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He strode through the restaurant, nodding to an acquaintance at the bar, and disappeared through the heavy oak doors, leaving Charlotte alone at the table, the unsigned divorce papers sitting between a half-eaten plate of lamb and a monumentally expensive bottle of wine. A few moments later, the waiter, a young man with kind, nervous eyes, approached the table. He held a small, leather-bound bill folder. "Ma'am," he began, his voice hesitant as he took in the empty chair and the woman's shell-shocked expression. He placed the folder on the table. "Your check whenever you're ready." Charlotte stared at it. She knew Sebastian. She knew his taste, his need to always order the most expensive, the most exclusive. She slowly opened the folder. The number at the bottom seemed to leap off the page, a cruel 4-digit punchline to a joke she never understood. 2,145,017. And she was alone, pregnant with a dead-end credit card and a broken heart. Humiliation is a uniquely potent poison. It doesn't just wound, it paralyzes. For a full 5 minutes, Charlotte sat frozen, the open bill folder, a testament to her public execution. The murmur of the restaurant, once a sophisticated backdrop, now felt like a chorus of whispers directed at her. The abandoned wife. The fool. The woman who couldn't even keep her millionaire husband. The kind-eyed waiter, whose name tag read Leo, hovered nearby, a study in professional anxiety. He knew something was terribly wrong. Charlotte could feel his pity, and it was like salt in an open wound. She had to move. She had to do something. Her mind raced frantically, searching for a solution. The joint credit card Sebastian had given her was a trap. He would see the charge instantly, and it would become another piece of ammunition for his lawyers. "See, she's still trying to spend my money." Her personal debit card, linked to an account she'd kept from her old life, held less than $300, a pathetic sum in this new world she inhabited. Then she remembered. Tucked away in a small, forgotten clutch in the back of her closet was her runaway card. It was a credit card she'd opened herself a year ago, in her own name, using the small, sporadic income from a few freelance design projects she'd taken on against Sebastian's wishes. She had kept it a secret, a tiny act of rebellion, a lifeline she prayed she would never need. The limit was only 5,000, but tonight it might as well be 1,000,000. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed for a taxi, her voice a strained whisper. Then she flagged down Leo. I'll take care of this now." She managed her voice steadier than she felt. She slid the secret card out of her wallet, shielding its name with her thumb. Leo took it, his relief palpable. "Of course, ma'am." He hurried away, leaving her alone once more with the damning envelope on the table. She couldn't bring herself to open it fully, but she could see the letterhead of a notoriously ruthless divorce attorney, Arthur Vance. She shoved the entire envelope into her oversized handbag, the paper feeling toxic to the touch. The walk out of Aurelia was the longest of her life. She kept her head held high, her eyes fixed on the exit, refusing to meet the curious gazes that followed her. The cool night air hit her like a slap, a welcome shock to her system. Her taxi was waiting. As she slid into the back seat, the weight of what had just happened finally crashed down on her. The drive back to the Fifth Avenue penthouse was a blur of streetlights and tears she could no longer hold back. Sobs racked her body, silent, agonizing spasms of grief and terror. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm against her ribs, as if trying to comfort or escape. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her hand protectively on her stomach. "I've got you. I've got you." It was a promise she had no idea how she would keep. The doorman, a kind elderly man named Patrick, who always had a smile for her, greeted her with a concerned look. "Mrs. Croft. Is everything all right?" Mr. Croft's driver picked him up hours ago. He seemed in a hurry. "I'm fine, Patrick. Just a long night," she lied, forcing a weak smile. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt like an ascent to a tomb. The doors opened onto their private foyer, and the silence was immediate and absolute. It was a dead silence, the kind that follows a storm. She stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was the empty space on the wall where a large, abstract painting he'd loved had hung. Then she saw the gaps on the bookshelves, the missing silver cigar box on the coffee table. She walked numbly through the sprawling apartment. In their shared closet, his side was bare. The racks of custom suits, the neat rows of Italian leather shoes, all gone. On his side of the bed, the nightstand was empty. Even his charging cables were gone. The efficiency of it all was the cruelest part. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. This was a meticulously planned operation. He had been packing his bags while she was picking out a dress for their date night. He had been orchestrating her public humiliation while she naively hoped for a reconciliation. The anger came then hot and clarifying, burning through the shock and grief. He hadn't just left her. He had tried to annihilate her. He wanted her to feel small, helpless, and utterly dependent on the generous crumbs he'd offered in that envelope. He expected her to crumble to take the deal and to disappear quietly. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress still holding the faint scent of his cologne, a ghost in their shared space. Panic began to set in again. What was she going to do? Her family was in Ohio, a world away. Calling them would mean admitting the spectacular failure of her marriage, worrying her retired parents sick. Her friends, the few he hadn't managed to push away, would be sympathetic, but they couldn't possibly understand the scale of the battle she was facing. She was up against Sebastian Croft, a man who treated business and life like a war of attrition, a man who had limitless resources and zero scruples. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over her mother's number. She couldn't do it. Not yet. She needed a plan. She needed leverage. She needed a miracle. Her eyes scanned the contacts list, a graveyard of forgotten friendships and society acquaintances. Then she saw a name she hadn't called in over a year, a name she was almost afraid to dial. Margaret Croft, Sebastian's mother. Her relationship with Margaret was complex and distant. Margaret was old money, a matriarch from a world of quiet inherited power that looked down on Sebastian's brash new money tactics. She was a woman of formidable composure and icy civility. She had never been overtly unkind to Charlotte, but there was always a sense of observation of judgment held in reserve. Margaret saw Charlotte. Charlotte suspected as just another one of Sebastian's acquisitions, prettier and with better manners than most, but an acquisition nonetheless. Calling her was a monumental risk. Margaret was fiercely loyal to the family name. She would likely side with her son, admonishing Charlotte for her part in the marriage's failure and advising her to take the deal and avoid a public scandal. It was the logical, pragmatic Croft thing to do. But as Charlotte sat there in the ruins of her life, a different memory of Margaret surfaced. It was from a family dinner about a year ago. Sebastian had been belittling Charlotte's design work, making a joke about her little hobby. Charlotte had simply gone quiet, as she'd learned to do. But across the table she had seen it a brief, sharp flash of disapproval in Margaret's eyes, a tightening of her jaw. It was gone in an instant, but Charlotte had seen it. Margaret hadn't defended her, but she had noticed, and she had not approved of her son's cruelty. It was a long shot, a desperate, wild gamble, but it was the only one she had. Her fingers shaking, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. She was about to hang up her courage, failing when a calm, clipped voice answered. Charlotte. It's past midnight. Is everything all right? Charlotte opened her mouth, but all that came out was a choked sob. There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of impatience, but of careful listening. Where are you? Margaret asked, her tone shifting from surprise to something more serious, more focused. The penthouse, Charlotte managed to say. Is Sebastian there? No. He left me. At the restaurant. He left me with the bill and divorce papers. The entire ugly story tumbled out in a rush of broken sentences. Another pause. Longer this time. Charlotte held her breath, expecting the cold dismissal the lecture. But when Margaret Croft spoke again, her voice was like ice. Not the ice of indifference, but the ice of a gathering storm. He did what the question hung in the air, sharp and brittle. It wasn't accusatory. It was clarifying. Margaret Croft was gathering facts, her mind working with the cold precision of a general assessing a battlefield. Tell me everything, Charlotte. Margaret commanded, her voice devoid of pity, but laced with an unnerving intensity. Start with the restaurant. What did he say? What exactly was in the envelope? Stammering at first, then with growing clarity, Charlotte recounted the entire evening. The condescending monologue, the pronouncements of her being a liability, the theatrical reveal of the separation agreement, and the final brutal act of leaving her with a nearly $3,000 bill. She explained how she'd paid with her secret credit card, the lonely taxi ride, and the shock of the empty closets. As she spoke, she could hear the faint scratching of a pen on the other end of the line. Margaret was taking notes. The lawyer. Margaret interrupted. Was it Arthur Vance? Yes, Charlotte whispered, stunned. How did you know? A dry, mirthless chuckle came down the line. Because Arthur is a shark who specializes in asset concealment for philandering husbands. Sebastian has had him on a retainer for the last 6 months. I make it my business to know these things. 6 months. The betrayal went deeper than Charlotte could have ever imagined. He'd been planning this for half a year, all while he was talking about nursery colors and holding her hand at sonograms. The thought made her physically ill. He thinks you'll be intimidated. Margaret continued, her voice hardening. He thinks you'll roll over and sign whatever he puts in front of you to avoid a fight. He has gravely underestimated you. And as it turns out, he has gravely underestimated me. There was a beat of silence before Margaret delivered the words that would change everything. Stay where you are. Don't touch that envelope again. Don't answer any calls or messages from him or anyone associated with him. I'll be there in 45 minutes. The line went dead. Charlotte sat in the silent penthouse, her mind reeling. She had expected a lecture, perhaps a bit of chilly advice. She had not expected a call to arms. The next 45 minutes were a blur of nervous energy. She walked from room to room, the opulent spaces now feeling like a movie set for a life that was no longer hers. She made a cup of herbal tea, her hands shaking so badly that hot water sloshed over the sides of the mug. True to her word, precisely 43 minutes later, the private elevator chimed. The doors opened to reveal Margaret Croft. She was not dressed for a late-night emergency visit. She was immaculate in a charcoal grey cashmere coat, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, a structured leather briefcase in one hand. She looked less like a concerned mother-in-law and more like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. She swept into the apartment, her sharp eyes taking in the empty spaces on the walls, the bare closets, the single teacup on the marble island. Her gaze finally landed on Charlotte, and for the first time, Charlotte saw a flicker of something beyond steel, a deep, weary sadness. "He has his father's worst instincts," Margaret said, her voice quiet. It wasn't an apology, but a statement of fact. All of the ruthlessness, none of the charm that made it palatable. She walked over to Charlotte, and to Charlotte's utter astonishment, placed a cool, dry hand on her arm. The touch was brief, but it was a gesture of solidarity. "Let me be clear," Margaret said, her voice regaining its commanding tone. "My son has brought shame upon the Croft name. This isn't just an attack on you. It is an attack on the legacy I have spent my life preserving. And more importantly, it is an attack on my grandchild. I will not allow it." She gestured toward the sofa. "Sit. We have work to do." Margaret opened her briefcase on the coffee table. It was not filled with tissues and platitudes. It was filled with files, notebooks, and a tablet. She was a woman prepared for war. "First, you will not be signing his absurd agreement," she stated, pulling on a pair of slim reading glasses. "He wants a quiet, clean break, so he can install that little strumpet from his marketing department, Cassandra Thorne. Without any financial inconvenience. We are going to make this the most inconvenient, loud, and financially catastrophic event of his young life." The casual, dismissive way she said Cassandra's name confirmed every fear Charlotte had harbored. Margaret knew. She knew everything. "Sebastian believes his money makes him invincible." Margaret continued, her eyes flashing. "What he fails to understand is that my money, the family's money, which his entire enterprise was built upon, comes with its own power. A power he has forgotten he is subject to." She then laid out a history Charlotte had only ever glimpsed. The initial seed money for Sebastian's tech company hadn't come from venture capitalists, as he so often claimed in interviews. It had come from a trust. Margaret controlled a fund from her side of the family that stretched back to the railroad tycoons of the 19th century. Sebastian was a beneficiary, not the source. "He has access to profits, but I have influence over the principal," Margaret explained. "He has been moving assets, trying to shelter them in shell corporations under the guidance of Mr. Vance. He thinks I'm an old woman who spends her days at garden parties. He has forgotten that I sit on the board of 2 major banks and that I still read every financial report generated by the family office." She pulled out a file. "This is a preliminary report from a private investigator I hired 3 months ago, when I first noticed Sebastian's unusual financial activity and heard the whispers about Miss Thorne." Charlotte stared at her dumbfounded. Margaret had been investigating her own son for 3 months. "I had hoped it was a passing indiscretion," Margaret said, a flicker of pain in her expression. "I hoped he would come to his senses. But leaving you pregnant in such a vile and public manner. This is a declaration of war. He has crossed a line from which there is no return." Margaret's focus was absolute. "Tomorrow morning, we are not calling a divorce lawyer. We are retaining a legal team. My team. And we are not merely filing for divorce. We are filing a multi-pronged complaint. We will petition for an emergency court order to freeze his personal assets, pending a full financial disclosure. We will file for sole physical and legal custody of the child with supervised visitation for him at our discretion. And we will use the incident at the restaurant as the cornerstone of a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress." She looked directly at Charlotte, her gaze piercing. "But to do this, I need your full cooperation. I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" The question hung in the air. For the first time in months, a spark of hope ignited within Charlotte. It wasn't the weak hope of reconciliation. It was the fierce, burning hope for justice. She was not alone. She had an ally, an unexpected, formidable, and terrifyingly competent one. She straightened her back, meeting Margaret's gaze. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold resolve that mirrored the woman sitting across from her. "Yes," Charlotte said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I can." Margaret gave a single, sharp nod of approval. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Good. Now about that bill from Aurelia. Did you keep the receipt?" "Yes, it's in my purse." "Excellent," Margaret said, snapping her briefcase shut. "We'll be submitting that as our first exhibit. Let's see how Sebastian's board of directors feels about him abandoning his pregnant wife over a nearly $3,000 dinner bill. We are going to file charges on your behalf, Charlotte, not in a criminal court, but in the court of public opinion and family law, where the sentences are far, far more costly." The next morning, Charlotte woke not in the cold, empty bed of the penthouse, but in a plush guest suite in Margaret Croft's sprawling pre-war apartment on Park Avenue. Sometime after 2 a.m., Margaret had insisted with the quiet authority of a 5-star general that Charlotte could not stay another night in a place that had been turned into a crime scene of emotional carnage. A silent driver had been summoned, and Charlotte, with a small overnight bag, hastily packed with essentials Margaret had provided, was spirited away into the night, waking up to the soft morning light filtering through silk curtains. For a moment Charlotte felt a disorienting sense of peace, then the reality of her situation crashed back in. But this time it was different. The terror was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was shadowed by a new, unfamiliar feeling purpose. By 8 a.m., she was seated in a leather-paneled office that smelled of old books and power. This was not the office of a mere divorce lawyer. This was the inner sanctum of Evelyn Vance, a woman whose name was uttered in hushed, reverent tones in New York's legal circles. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that made Margaret Croft seem warm and fuzzy by comparison. And crucially, she was Arthur Vance's older sister and arch-rival, a fact that brought a grim satisfaction to the room. Margaret had made the call at dawn. The meeting was not a consultation, it was a strategy session. "Let's be clear on the objective," Evelyn began, her voice crisp as she perused the notes Margaret had sent ahead. "Sebastian wants a quiet settlement that allows him to maintain his public image and the vast majority of his perceived wealth. Our objective is to deny him that. We will not be quiet, and the settlement will be anything but a token." She looked at Charlotte, her gaze analytical but not unkind. "Charlotte, I know this is difficult. The legal system is a blunt instrument. They will try to portray you as a gold digger, an unstable, emotional woman. You must be prepared for that." "I am," Charlotte said, her voice firm. She had spent the night steeling herself for this. "Good." Evelyn nodded. "Because we have a significant advantage. 2, in fact. The first is the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his actions. Leaving a pregnant woman humiliated in a public restaurant is not a good look even for a titan of industry. It's primal, it's villainous, and a judge especially, a female judge, will not look kindly upon it. It establishes a pattern of behavior. And the second advantage?" Charlotte asked. Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. The second advantage is Margaret. Margaret, who had been listening silently, spoke up. My son has built a house of cards on a foundation of my family's money. He has leveraged assets from the Croft family trust to secure lines of credit for his more speculative ventures. These ventures are not officially part of his marital property. Evelyn and I are about to argue that they are. Evelyn slid a thick document across the mahogany desk to Charlotte. This is our initial filing. It is an emergency petition. We are asking the court for 3 things immediately. First, an ex parte restraining order preventing Sebastian from contacting you, coming near you, or liquidating any marital assets. Second, we are demanding he vacate the Fifth Avenue penthouse as it is marital property, and you, as a vulnerable pregnant woman who has been abandoned, have the greater need. Third, we are filing for temporary spousal and child support that is commensurate not just with his declared income, but with the lifestyle he established for you. Charlotte's eyes widened as she scanned the figures. The amount they were demanding was staggering. It wasn't just for living expenses. It was a strategic blow designed to get his immediate and undivided attention. He will fight this, Charlotte breathed. Of course he will, Evelyn said. And when he does, he will have to submit a full sworn financial affidavit. His brother Arthur will try to hide as much as possible. But they won't be expecting us to have a roadmap to his hidden accounts. That was Margaret's contribution. She opened her briefcase and produced a slim leather-bound ledger. For the last 5 years, I have had an independent accounting firm conduct a quarterly audit of the family trust and its related interests. Sebastian is aware of this, but he believes it's a mere formality. He has no idea that the firm reports directly to me. I know about the Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands. I know about the art he purchased through a holding company and has stored in a Swiss free port. I know about the consulting fees paid to Cassandra Thorne's personal LLC. It's all here. The room was silent for a moment, as the weight of Margaret's betrayal of her son and her loyalty to justice sank in. This was not just a divorce. It was a meticulously planned demolition. The process will begin now, Evelyn said, picking up her phone. We filed the petition electronically. A process server is already on standby. Sebastian will likely be served at his office this afternoon, in front of as many people as possible. The rest of the day was a blur of activity. Charlotte signed affidavits, answered detailed questions about her marriage, and provided access to every email and text message she had from Sebastian. It was draining, like excavating her own heart for evidence. Margaret stayed by her side, a silent, formidable presence ensuring Charlotte ate, drank water, and stayed focused. Late that afternoon, Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a flicker of grim satisfaction in her eyes. "It's done," she announced. The server delivered the papers to Sebastian in the middle of a board meeting. Charlotte could almost picture the scene, the hushed boardroom. The confusion, Sebastian's handsome face contorting first in disbelief, then in pure, unadulterated rage as he saw the names on the petition: Charlotte Hayes Croft, ver. Sebastian Croft. And worse, the signature on the supporting affidavit from his primary financial backer, his own mother. The counterattack was immediate. Within the hour, news websites that catered to the tech and finance world began publishing articles. The narrative was clear, spun by a high-priced crisis PR firm. Tech visionary Sebastian Croft victim of acrimonious split, read one headline. The articles painted Charlotte as a demanding, unstable wife whose lavish spending and emotional outbursts had tragically fractured the marriage. They hinted that her pregnancy was a last-ditch effort to trap him. Charlotte felt sick as she read the lies, the cruel twisting of their life into a weapon against her. "Ignore it," Margaret commanded, taking the tablet from Charlotte's hands. "It's predictable. It's also a mistake on his part. He's trying to fight a public battle. We are fighting a legal one. Let him sling mud. We are building a fortress." The true blowback came via a phone call, not to Charlotte, who Sebastian was now legally barred from contacting, but to Margaret. She took the call in her private study. The heavy doors closed. Even so, Charlotte could hear the muffled sound of a man roaring with rage. The call lasted for nearly 20 minutes. When Margaret emerged, her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. "He is displeased," she said with monumental understatement. "He accused me of treason, of trying to ruin him. He threatened to cut me off to ensure I never see my grandchild." "Margaret, I am so sorry." Charlotte began, her heart aching for the woman who was sacrificing her own son for her. Margaret held up a hand, cutting her off. "Do not be sorry. I am not. I told him that he had already made his choice when he left you at that restaurant. I told him that every action has a consequence, and his were about to come due. And I informed him that if he ever wanted to see his child, he would do it on our terms, and that his first step was to fire Arthur Vance and hire an attorney who was interested in a swift and fair settlement." She took a deep, steadying breath. "He has sealed his own fate, Charlotte. Now we simply let the machine we've built do its work. The Croft war machine was fully engaged, and its target was one of its own." The first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. To Sebastian, it must have felt like an eternity. To Charlotte, it felt like a lifetime crammed into 14 days. The world she had known had vanished, replaced by a strange new reality of legal consultations, strategic planning, and the quiet, gilded sanctuary of Margaret's Park Avenue residence. Sebastian, true to form, did not go quietly. Denied direct contact, he waged his war through proxies and the press. More articles appeared, each one more vicious than the last. Anonymous sources, friends of Sebastian, no doubt spoke of Charlotte's erratic behavior and unreasonable demands. A paparazzi photographer suddenly appeared outside Margaret's building, snapping photos of a visibly pregnant Charlotte getting into a car. The resulting headline was cruel: "The $1 million bump inside Charlotte Croft's pricey divorce demands." The public attacks were painful, but inside the war room of Evelyn Vance's office, they were systematically dismantled and repurposed. "This is a gift," Evelyn said, pointing to the paparazzi photo on a screen. "He's trying to paint you as greedy, but all a judge will see is a pregnant woman being harassed because her husband is a vindictive bully. He's documenting his own campaign of intimidation for us. Keep every article." His financial tactics were just as aggressive. He immediately froze the joint account, a pointless gesture since Charlotte was no longer using it. He sent a formal notice through his lawyer that he would no longer be paying the exorbitant maintenance fees on the Fifth Avenue penthouse, a move designed to force a sale. Evelyn and Margaret countered every thrust with a skillful parry. To the notice about the penthouse fees, Evelyn's office responded coolly that they were pleased he was vacating the marital home as per their petition, and that he could forward all future bills to their office, as they would be covered by the emergency support they were demanding. They filed a motion to have his PR firm's invoices submitted as part of his personal expenditures, arguing that he was using marital funds to defame his wife. The true masterstroke, however, came from Margaret. She had her banking connections place a compliance review on the lines of credit tied to the Croft family trust. It was a bureaucratic move, perfectly legal, that had the immediate effect of freezing Sebastian's access to a huge pool of his operating capital. It was like cutting a main supply line to an army. Suddenly, his ability to wage an infinitely funded legal war was severely hampered. He was forced to fight with only the money he had managed to squirrel away, not the vast fortune he had always taken for granted. The day of the hearing arrived a cold grey morning. Charlotte dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant maternity dress in a deep navy blue. She was not a victim. She was a mother, fighting for her child's future. Margaret stood beside her, a pillar of strength in Chanel tweed. The courtroom was a small, sterile chamber. Sebastian was already there, standing with his brother Arthur. He looked haggard. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, simmering fury. When his eyes met Charlotte's, she saw pure hatred, and it made her flinch. But then she felt Margaret's hand on her elbow, a small, grounding pressure, and she held his gaze without wavering. The hearing was a brutal, clinical affair. Arthur Vance, slick and overconfident, argued that the restraining order was an overreach, that Sebastian had been planning an amicable separation, and that Charlotte's demands were a form of extortion. He painted Sebastian as a generous husband, shocked by his wife's sudden greed. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She was calm, methodical, and devastating. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented facts. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here because Mr. Croft, a man with a net worth in the hundreds of millions, decided the most appropriate way to end his marriage was to abandon his 7 months pregnant wife in a restaurant, leaving her to pay a bill of $2,845.17. She held up a copy of the receipt. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, peered at it over her glasses. Evelyn continued, her voice even. He did this after ensuring his closets were empty, and a punitive separation agreement was in her hands. He then orchestrated a press campaign to defame her. These are not the actions of a man seeking an amicable split. These are the actions of a bully attempting to coerce a vulnerable woman into submission. She then presented the preliminary evidence of the hidden assets, the shell corporations, the payments to Cassandra Thorne's LLC. With every document she produced, Arthur Vance's face grew paler, and Sebastian's jaw tightened. The judge listened, her expression unreadable. She asked a few pointed questions of Arthur, focusing on the timing of the asset movements. His answers were evasive and unconvincing. Finally, the judge looked at Sebastian directly. "Mr. Croft, do you have anything you wish to say about the incident at the Aurelia restaurant?" Sebastian stood, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "It was a private dinner, a misunderstanding. My wife is being overly emotional." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Overly emotional. It seems to me that being left alone pregnant with a nearly $3,000 bill is a situation that might provoke some emotion in even the most stoic individual." She then delivered her ruling. The restraining order was granted. The motion for Sebastian to vacate the penthouse was granted, and the request for temporary support was granted at a figure even higher than Evelyn had requested, with the judge citing Mr. Croft's bad faith actions and attempts to intimidate the petitioner. It was a total, unequivocal victory. Arthur Vance looked stunned. Sebastian looked as if he had been physically struck. As the judge adjourned, he turned his face a mask of fury and took a step towards the opposing table. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, directed not at Charlotte, but at his mother. "You did this. You traitorous old witch. You will regret this." Court officers immediately moved towards him, but Margaret did not flinch. She met her son's gaze. her own eyes filled with a chilling mixture of pity and resolve. "No, Sebastian," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet room. "You did this to yourself. I am simply holding you accountable." The confrontation was the breaking point. That evening, a shaken Arthur Vance called Evelyn Vance. The war was over. Sebastian wanted to settle. The negotiations were swift and brutal. With Margaret's ledger as their guide, there was nowhere for Sebastian to hide his money. His attempts to undervalue his company were met with the threat of a full forensic audit, which would expose his financial maneuverings to his investors and board. The final reckoning came a week later in Evelyn's conference room. Sebastian sat on one side of a vast table, a new chastened lawyer beside him. He looked defeated. His empire was intact, but his invincibility was shattered. He had been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and brought to heel by the two women he had underestimated the most. Charlotte was granted the penthouse outright. A multi-million-dollar trust was established for the baby, untouchable by either parent until the child turned 25. She received a lifetime alimony settlement that guaranteed her financial independence forever. The terms were ironclad. When it was over, Sebastian signed the papers without a word. He stood, refused to look at Charlotte or his mother, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, the final sound of a chapter of her life closing for good. In the silence, Charlotte looked at Margaret, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. Margaret simply reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The alliance forged in a moment of crisis had held. The war was won. Freedom, Charlotte discovered, had a scent. It smelled like the fresh paint in her new apartment, a sun-drenched space in the West Village that she had picked out herself. It smelled like the lemon and lavender cleaning products she used, replacing the sterile chemical scent of the penthouse's cleaning service. Most of all, it smelled like the sweet, powdery aroma of baby lotion and new beginnings. 6 weeks after the settlement was signed, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace, not after a family member, but for the virtue she had fought so hard to reclaim for herself. The penthouse, that monument to a life that had almost crushed her, was sold. Charlotte had no desire to live in a gilded cage, no matter how beautiful. With a portion of the proceeds and the security of the settlement, she purchased the West Village apartment and invested the rest under the guidance of a financial advisor, recommended by to no one's surprise Margaret. Her relationship with her former mother-in-law had evolved into something quiet and profound. The formalities were gone, replaced by a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. Margaret was a frequent visitor, arriving not with the stiff obligation of a society matriarch, but with the genuine warmth of a doting grandmother. She would sit for hours, holding baby Grace, her steely composure melting away as she whispered stories and sang old lullabies. She never spoke of Sebastian. It was an unspoken agreement. His name was a ghost they had both exorcised from their lives. Charlotte heard through the grapevine that he had in fact married Cassandra Thorne in a quiet, unpublicized ceremony. His company had taken a significant reputational hit from the rumors surrounding the divorce, and several key investors had pulled out. He was still a wealthy man, but his meteoric rise had been checked. He had learned the hard way that some foundations are not meant to be broken. One sunny afternoon, as Charlotte was rocking Grace in the nursery, she had designed a room of soft creams, gentle greens, and whimsical watercolor animals. Margaret watched them from the doorway. "You've built a beautiful life here, Charlotte," she said, her voice softer than Charlotte had ever heard it. "We built it," Charlotte corrected, looking up at her. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Margaret. You saved me." Margaret walked into the room and placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "You saved yourself, my dear. You had the courage to make that first call. You had the strength to stand up and fight. I simply provided the ammunition. Never forget that." Looking down at her daughter, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, Charlotte knew Margaret was right. The naive girl who had been so captivated by a billionaire's charm was gone forever. In her place was a woman, a mother who understood her own worth. She had been left alone at a table intended to be a footnote in a powerful man's story, but she had refused to be a victim. With the help of an unlikely ally, she had picked up a pen and written her own ending. The city hummed outside her window, a symphony of endless possibility. Her life was no longer about glittering parties or designer labels. It was about the simple, solid weight of her daughter in her arms, the warmth of the sun on her face, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was finally truly in control of her own destiny. She was home. That's the incredible story of Charlotte Hayes Croft. A woman who turned a moment of profound humiliation into a declaration of independence. It's a powerful reminder that strength isn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. Sebastian thought his money made him invincible, but he forgot that true power lies in integrity, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between women who refuse to be silenced. Charlotte and Margaret's story shows us that sometimes the most powerful ally you can have is the one you least expect. What did you think of Margaret's decision to side with her daughter-in-law against her own son? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true-life stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening. The anonymous email landed in my inbox at 2:17 a.m. The subject line was just 2 words, St. Jude's. Inside there was no text, only a link. A link to a video that would detonate my life. It was raw, grainy security footage from the maternity ward of the very hospital where my husband Michael had supposedly mourned the loss of our stillborn son just 3 weeks earlier. But the video didn't show a grieving father. It showed a man I barely recognized, his face etched, not with sorrow, but with a chilling, frantic energy. And the woman he was, with her hand clutching his. That woman wasn't me. They say the truth sets you free. But as I watched that footage, all I felt was the cold, hard reality of a lie so monstrous it would unravel not just a marriage, but the very fabric of who I thought we were. My world, the one I had so meticulously curated, was painted in shades of beige and pottery barn. It was a world of scented candles, Sunday brunches, and the soft cashmere-wrapped dream of impending motherhood. Michael and I were that couple, the ones whose Christmas cards made other people vaguely resentful. He was a successful architect, all sharp lines and even sharper suits, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. I was a freelance graphic designer, a profession that allowed me the flexibility to nest, to obsess over paint swatches for the nursery, and to scroll endlessly through baby name forums. Our life in our sprawling suburban home just outside of Austin, Texas, was a testament to shared ambition, and I thought shared love. We'd met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a decade-long marriage. We'd weathered his demanding career, my brief but intense flirtation with opening a bakery, and the quiet, creeping anxiety of trying for a baby. When the 2 pink lines finally appeared on the pregnancy test, it felt less like a surprise and more like a hard-won victory. Michael had wept. He'd dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to my still flat stomach, whispering promises to our unborn child. He was an exemplary, expectant father. He assembled the crib with an engineer's precision, attended every Lamaze class, and learned to expertly massage my swollen ankles. He'd talk to my belly for hours, telling our son, whom we'd already named Caleb, about the world he was about to enter. The pregnancy was, for the most part, idyllic. I'd lean into the stereotype craving pickles and ice cream, and Michael would dutifully make midnight runs to the 24-hour grocery store. Our friends Mark and Sarah, who had 2 boisterous toddlers of their own, would watch us with a knowing, almost pitying fondness. "Just you wait," Mark would chuckle, ruffling Michael's hair. "Sleep now. You'll thank me later." The first fissure in our perfect world appeared so subtly, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a month before my due date. Michael called, his voice strained. "Sweetheart, I have to fly out to Chicago. A last-minute thing with the Harrison project. A major investor is threatening to pull out." Chicago now. I'd asked, a knot of disappointment tightening in my chest. We had a birthing class that evening. "I know, I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wouldn't go if it wasn't a 5-alarm fire. I'll be back Thursday, I promise. I love you. I love you both." He was so convincing, so genuinely apologetic, that I'd pushed my unease aside. It was his job. It was our future. But then, a few days after he was supposed to have returned, I was scrolling through Instagram. A girl I'd gone to college with, a bubbly blonde named Chloe Jenkins, who now worked in PR in Chicago, had posted a story. A picture of a crowded, trendy cocktail bar, the kind with Edison bulbs and artisanal gin, and there in the background, unmistakable even in the blurry periphery, was Michael. He was laughing, his head tilted back, a drink in his hand. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a casual Henley, the one I always said brought out the blue in his eyes. And his arm was draped casually around the shoulders of a striking redhead I'd never seen before. My blood ran cold. I took a screenshot, my fingers trembling. When I confronted him, showing him the picture, he didn't even flinch. He looked at me with those earnest blue eyes and laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Amy, sweetheart, you're seeing things. That's not even me." "Michael, I know what you look like. It's a blurry photo. It's some guy who looks like me." And Chloe. "You know, she's always been a bit of a drama queen. Probably just trying to stir something up." He pulled me into a hug, stroking my hair. "You're hormonal, baby. It's okay. I was in meetings the entire time. I was miserable. I missed you and Caleb every second." He was so good. So plausible. He showed me his expense reports, a string of Uber rides to a bland corporate office park, a dinner for one at a generic steakhouse. He had an answer for everything. I wanted to believe him. The alternative was a chasm I wasn't ready to face. So I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the impending birth was making me irrational. I deleted the screenshot. I apologized. And I tucked the incident away in a dark corner of my mind, a place I refused to visit. 2 weeks later, I went into labor. It was premature, a full 3 weeks early, but the doctors at St. Jude's Medical Center weren't overly concerned. The contractions came hard and fast. Michael was by my side, a rock. He held my hand. He breathed with me. He whispered encouragement. He was the perfect husband, the perfect father-to-be. The hours blurred into a haze of pain and fear. There were complications. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The calm, reassuring voices of the nurses started to take on a sharper edge. The room filled with more people. I remember the anesthesiologist's kind eyes, the cold sting of the epidural. I remember the doctor, a woman with a stern but compassionate face, saying, "We need to get him out now." Then nothing. A black, empty void. I woke up in a quiet, dimly lit room. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was gone. The bustling energy of the labor ward had been replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. Michael was slumped in a chair by my bed, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. "Michael?" My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. He looked up, and his face broke me. It was a mask of utter devastation. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Tears streamed down his cheeks unheeded. "He's gone, Amy." He choked out, his voice thick with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Caleb, he didn't make it." The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables that my brain refused to assemble into a coherent thought. I looked down at my body, at the flat expanse of my stomach beneath the thin hospital blanket. The life that had been there, the kicks and flutters that had become the rhythm of my days, was gone. The doctor came in and explained it in gentle clinical terms. Placental abruption, a rare catastrophic event. There was nothing anyone could have done. It was no one's fault. They were so sorry for my loss. The days that followed were a blur of unimaginable pain. I was a ghost, haunting the corridors of my own life. The nursery, once a room of joyful anticipation, became a mausoleum. Every tiny onesie, every perfectly folded blanket was a dagger to my heart. Michael was my shadow, my keeper. He handled everything. The hospital paperwork, the funeral arrangements, a small private service that I was too sedated to fully comprehend. He fielded the calls from concerned friends and family. He held me when I woke up screaming in the night. He seemed to be drowning in his own sea of grief. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He'd sit for hours in the rocking chair in the nursery, just staring at the empty crib. He was the very picture of a bereaved father, and I clung to him. His grief was the only thing that validated my own. We were in this together, two shipwrecked survivors on a desolate shore. Our shared loss was the fragile raft that kept us afloat. I needed his pain to be as real as mine. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that had suddenly cruelly stopped making sense. The lie was perfect. It was seamless, comprehensive, and utterly devastatingly believable. He had built a fortress of sorrow around us, and I, his willing prisoner, had never once thought to check if the walls were real. The first 3 weeks after we lost Caleb were a suffocating fog. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, which I mostly observed from the cocoon of my bed. Michael was my constant, my warden of grief. He brought me meals I didn't eat, coaxed me into showers I didn't want, and filled the silence with a steady stream of soothing, empty words. "We'll get through this, Amy. He'll always be our son. I love you so much." His performance was flawless. He never missed a beat. When my mother came to stay for a week, her own face a mirror of my sorrow, she'd watch Michael with tear-filled eyes. "You're a good man, Michael," she'd whispered to him in the kitchen one afternoon, a moment I overheard from the top of the stairs. "Thank God Amelia has you." He'd even begun to channel his grief into a project. He announced one evening, his voice heavy but resolute, that he was designing a memorial garden for the hospital, a place for parents like us. He'd said, his gaze distant, a place to remember the children we never got to hold. He'd spend hours at his drafting table, sketching intricate plans for fountains and benches and flower beds. It was all so noble, so heartbreakingly poignant. But grief is a strange and unpredictable beast. In its initial all-consuming phase, it blinds you. But as the raw, visceral agony begins to recede, even slightly, a new kind of clarity can emerge. Your senses, dulled by shock, slowly begin to sharpen. You start to notice things, small things, inconsistencies. The first crack was small, almost imperceptible. It was a bill, an itemized statement from the hospital. I'd found it in the mail which Michael had taken to sorting through before I saw it, to protect you from any unnecessary stress, he'd said. This one had apparently slipped through his filtration system. I scanned the list of charges, a morbid curiosity compelling me to relive the trauma in black and white. Anesthesia, operating room fees, pharmacy. And then a line item that made me pause. NICU, level 3 care, 3 days. NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. I frowned. Why would Caleb have been in the NICU? The doctor had been clear. It was a stillbirth. He was gone before he was born. There was no care, intensive or otherwise. I assumed it was a clerical error, a common enough occurrence in the bureaucratic labyrinth of healthcare. But the detail lodged itself in my mind, a tiny burr under the skin. The second crack appeared a few days later. Sarah, my best friend, came over bearing a casserole and a bottle of wine she knew I wouldn't drink. She sat with me on the couch, letting the silence hang comfortably between us, before she finally spoke. "How are you really?" she asked, her voice gentle. I gave her my standard, non-committal answer. "Getting by." She nodded, her eyes full of a sympathy that for the first time felt a little off. There was something else there, a hesitation, a flicker of pity. No, that wasn't it. It was something closer to discomfort. "Amy," she began, choosing her words carefully. "When Michael called us from the hospital, he was a wreck. Mark and we wanted to come right away, but Michael was so insistent. He said you didn't want to see anyone, that you needed space." "I did," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't face anyone." "I get that," she said quickly. "Of course I do." But he said something else. Something odd. I waited, my body tensing. "He said that they had Caleb on life support," she said, her brow furrowed in confusion. "He said you were both just waiting, making a decision. He was asking Mark about what that was like to let go." The casserole on my lap suddenly felt like a lead weight. Life support. A decision. This was a narrative I hadn't heard, a version of the story that diverged wildly from the one I had been told. "He must have been confused," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He was in shock. We all were." "Of course," Sarah said, immediately backing down, sensing my distress. "That must be it. Oh, Amy, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have even brought it up. It's just... it stuck with me." But it stuck with me, too. It joined the NICU charge, another piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Michael on the phone with Mark, fabricating a story about our son on life support, played on a loop in my head. Why? Why would he lie about something so specific, so sacred? Was his grief so profound it had created false memories? Or was it something else? The memory of the Instagram photo from Chicago, the one I had so willingly dismissed, resurfaced with a vengeance. The laughing man with his arm around the redhead. "You're hormonal, baby. It's some guy who looks like me." My hands started to tremble. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, who was sleeping soundly, a picture of peaceful exhaustion. I tiptoed into his home office, the room where he was designing his memorial garden, a sanctuary of his supposed sorrow. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent house. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I had to look. His laptop was closed on his desk. I opened it. It was password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried Caleb. The screen unlocked. A wave of nausea washed over me, using our dead son's name as a password. The thought was both sickening and, in a twisted way, perfectly in character with the grieving father he was pretending to be. His email was already open. I felt a pang of guilt, a lifetime of respecting his privacy, warring with the gnawing suspicion that was now consuming me. I clicked on his sent folder. There were emails to contractors about the memorial garden, emails to his colleagues, thanking them for their condolences. And then I saw it. A thread of emails with a woman named Jenna Reed. My breath hitched. The redhead from the Instagram photo. The emails went back months. They started professionally enough, something about a joint project between his firm and hers in Chicago. But the tone quickly shifted. They became familiar, flirty, intimate. They talked about meeting for drinks for dinner. They talked about her recent divorce. They talked about how alive he felt when he was with her. I scrolled down, my vision blurring with tears. The dates were a brutal chronological indictment. There was an email from the day he'd supposedly flown to Chicago for his 5-alarm fire meeting. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "On my way, wheels up. Can't wait to see you. Counting the minutes. Ditch the boring conference dinner tonight. I found a place I think you'll love." And then I found the emails from the week Caleb had died. He'd been emailing her from the hospital, while I was in labor, while I was in surgery, while I was lying in a drugged haze, believing he was by my side, drowning in grief. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "It's happening. Amelia's in labor. It's early. This is it. Talk soon." Then a few hours later. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "It's happening. It's a nightmare here. Complications. Don't know what's going on. I'll call you when I can." And then the email that made me physically recoil, a gasp escaping my lips. It was sent the morning after I'd been told our son was gone. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "I need you. It's over. He didn't make it. It's for the best. I know we talked about this, the timing. It would have been impossible, but God, Jenna, it's still... I can't explain it. She's a mess. I have to be the strong one here. I have to play the part. But all I can think about is you. All I want is to be with you. This whole thing, it just makes me realize I can't live this lie anymore. As soon as I can, I'm coming to you. It's for the best. The timing. It would have been impossible. I have to play the part." The words swam before my eyes. The fortress he had built crumbled around me, and I saw the lie for what it was. It wasn't about shared grief. It was about an affair. It was about an exit strategy. The death of our son wasn't a tragedy he was enduring with me. It was a complication he was managing. A messy, loose end he needed to tie up so he could move on to his new life, his new woman. The NICU charge. The story about life support to Sarah and Mark. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. These weren't the ramblings of a grief-stricken mind. They were lies. Scaffolding to support a bigger, more monstrous lie. He needed a story that was dramatic, that required his constant attention, that isolated me and made him the heroic, grieving husband. A story that bought him time. My grief, which had been a raw, open wound, was suddenly eclipsed by a rage so white-hot, it was almost dizzying. The man sleeping in my bed, the man whose tears I had wiped away, the man whose hand I had clung to, as if it were a lifeline, was a stranger, a monster. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked out of the office and back into our bedroom. I stood by the bed, looking down at his sleeping face. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, and I felt a chilling, terrifying calm settle over me. The fog had lifted, and in its place was a cold, hard certainty. I didn't know what the full truth was, but I was going to find out. And I was going to burn his world to the ground. It was in this state of cold fury in the dead of night, fueled by betrayal and a desperate need for irrefutable proof, that I did something I never would have imagined myself capable of. I thought about the hospital, St. Jude's, a place of immense pain, but also a place with answers. I thought about the inconsistencies, the lies. And I thought about the one thing that doesn't lie. Cameras. I sent an anonymous email to a local investigative journalist, a woman named Isabella Rossi, whose work I'd followed, known for her tenacity in uncovering institutional malfeasance. And then I sent another one from a different burner account to a victims' rights group that specialized in medical negligence. I didn't know what would come of it, but I had planted a seed. I had lit a match. Now all I could do was wait for the explosion. It came a week later in the form of that 2:17 a.m. email. The one with the subject line, St. Jude's. The one with the link that would change everything. I clicked it, and my world went from a nightmare into a living hell. The video player loaded a stark white box against the dark screen of my laptop. There was no sound, just the silent, unblinking eye of a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 8:14 p.m. on the day Caleb died. The angle was from high in a corner, looking down on a section of a hospital corridor. It was unmistakably St. Jude's. The same pale green walls, the same polished linoleum floors I had stared at in a daze. The sign on the wall was blurry, but I could make out the letters NICU. My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. A nurse in blue scrubs walked briskly past the camera. A doctor followed a moment later. Then from the left of the frame, Michael appeared. My Michael. He was wearing the same dark grey sweater I'd laid out for him that morning. But the man on the screen was not the devastated husband-to-be I remembered. His posture was rigid, his movements jerky and agitated. He was pacing, running a hand through his hair, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked trapped, cornered. He stopped pacing and leaned against the wall directly under the camera. He was talking animatedly, his free hand gesturing in frustration. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the panic in his body language. This was not a man waiting for news about his laboring wife. This was a man trying to control a situation that was spiraling out of his grasp. Then from the right of the frame she appeared. Jenna Reed. The redhead from the Instagram photo, the name in the emails. In the flesh. She was wearing a chic black coat, looking utterly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. She walked directly to Michael, her face a mixture of concern and impatience. I watched my breath caught in my throat as she reached him. She put a hand on his arm. He immediately flinched, pulling away, shaking his head and glancing nervously down the hallway in the direction of my delivery room. He said something to her, his expression hard and dismissive. She recoiled, her own face hardening. They began to argue, a silent, frantic pantomime of rage and recrimination. She jabbed a finger at his chest. He grabbed her wrist. She tried to pull away. It was ugly, vicious, a scene not of shared comfort, but of a clandestine meeting gone horribly wrong. This wasn't a friend offering support. This was a confrontation. And then the most damning moment of all. A doctor, the same stern-faced woman who had delivered the news of Caleb's death to me, walked towards them from the direction of the NICU. She had a clipboard in her hand. She approached Michael, her expression grave. Michael's entire demeanor shifted. The anger vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of gut-wrenching sorrow. He physically crumpled, leaning his head against the wall, covering his face with his hands. It was a performance. A switch flipped. Jenna stood by her arms crossed, watching him with a look of cold, calculating assessment. The doctor spoke to Michael for a few moments, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of compassion. She pointed back towards the NICU. Michael shook his head vehemently. The doctor spoke again, her expression turning from sympathy to something more insistent. She seemed to be urging him towards the unit. He refused again, more forcefully this time, waving a hand dismissively. He said something that made the doctor's eyes widen in disbelief. Then she simply nodded, a look of profound sadness and perhaps a touch of disgust on her face, and walked away. Once the doctor was gone, Michael straightened up. The mask of grief fell away as quickly as it had appeared. He turned back to Jenna, his face a snarl of pure fury. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her roughly down the corridor, away from the NICU, away from my room and out of the camera's frame. The video ended. I stared at the blank screen, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. Caleb had been in the NICU. The bill was not a mistake. Sarah had not misheard. My son had been born alive. He had been alive, and he had been fighting for his life in a glass box just down the hall, and my husband, his father, had been in the corridor, arguing with his mistress. The doctor had tried to bring him to his son. She was urging him towards the unit, and he had refused. The lie was so much more monstrous than I could ever have conceived. He hadn't just lied about an affair. He hadn't just lied about the timing of Caleb's death to make his getaway easier. He had lied about our son's entire existence. He had let me believe our child was stillborn, a silent, painless tragedy, when in reality Caleb had lived. He had breathed, and he had died alone without his mother while his father refused to even go see him. Why? The answer was right there in the video, in the cold, hard expression on Jenna Reed's face, in the frantic, trapped energy of my husband, a living, breathing baby, a premature baby who would require months of intensive care and a lifetime of devotion that was not part of their plan. It was the ultimate complication. A stillbirth was a tragedy you could mourn and move on from. A critically ill child was an anchor, a lifelong responsibility that would have chained Michael to me forever. So he made a choice. He chose his affair over his son. He rewrote the narrative. He turned our son's fight for life into a story of instantaneous death. He curated my grief, managed my reality, to fit his sordid escape plan. The rage that had been simmering inside me erupted into a volcanic inferno. It was a physical force, so powerful I thought it would tear me apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to walk into the bedroom and wake him up, not with words, but with my bare hands. But then a different instinct took over, a cold, chilling calm. The same calm I'd felt when I'd decided to look at his laptop. This wasn't a private matter anymore. This wasn't a marital dispute to be settled with screaming matches and thrown pottery. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty against his own child. He had defrauded a hospital. He had lied to doctors. And he had enlisted his mistress as a co-conspirator. The leaked footage wasn't just my personal vindication. It was evidence. I forwarded the email with the video link to Isabella Rossi, the investigative journalist. My note was simple. This is security footage from St. Jude's Medical Center on the night of May 12th. The man in the video is Michael Davenport, a prominent Austin architect. He told his wife their son was stillborn. As you can see, that was a lie. Look into the NICU records. Look into Jenna Reed of Reed PR in Chicago. Look into the memorial garden he is currently fundraising for. He didn't just have an affair. He let his son die alone to save it. And then I forwarded it to the police. The story broke 2 days later. It wasn't just a local story. It went national. Isabella Rossi's article was a masterpiece of controlled fury, laying out the facts in stark, brutal detail. "The architect of a monstrous lie," the headline screamed. The article included stills from the security footage, Michael's face contorted in anger or Jenna's cold and watchful. It detailed the timeline, the emails, the hospital bill, the confirmation from anonymous sources at St. Jude's that baby boy Davenport had indeed spent 72 hours in the NICU before succumbing to complications of his premature birth. They had tried repeatedly to get the father to come and see the child, to authorize certain procedures, but he had been unreachable or unwilling to engage. The public response was instantaneous and savage. The story was a perfect storm of infidelity, betrayal, and the ultimate parental sin. Michael became a villain of almost cartoonish proportions overnight. His face was everywhere, on cable news, on tabloid websites, on social media feeds. The name Michael Davenport became synonymous with narcissistic cruelty. His firm fired him, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable and unethical personal conduct. The fundraising page for the memorial garden was taken down, but not before screenshots circulated online, a testament to his staggering hypocrisy. People found his social media, his firm's page, my own long-dormant accounts. The comments were a torrent of hatred. Monster. Psychopath. I hope he rots in hell. Jenna Reed was not spared. Her PR firm's website was flooded with one-star reviews. Her professional headshot was juxtaposed with the grainy security footage, still of her watching Michael's fake breakdown. She was branded the home-wrecking ghoul. Her career was incinerated in a matter of hours. I watched it all unfold from the guest room of Mark and Sarah's house. I had packed a single bag the morning after I saw the video and left before Michael woke up. I left my wedding ring on the pillow next to his head. I didn't leave a note. The entire world was about to leave him a note. My own role in the story was that of the tragic victim. The media painted me as the poor, grieving mother doubly betrayed by her monstrous husband. My photo, a smiling, pregnant shot from my Instagram, was splashed everywhere. I received an outpouring of sympathy from strangers around the world. It was surreal and strangely numbing. Their pity felt as distant and impersonal as their rage towards Michael. The only thing that felt real was the new agonizing truth about my son. Caleb. He had lived. He had a birth date and a death date. He had been a person in the world, however briefly. And this new knowledge brought with it a new kind of grief. It was sharper, more defined. I wasn't just mourning the loss of a dream anymore. I was mourning a real boy, a boy whose father had discarded him like a piece of trash. A few days after the story broke, Michael was arrested. The charge wasn't murder or anything as dramatic as the online mob wanted. It was fraud. He had knowingly provided false information to the hospital, leading them to misclassify the death and issue an incorrect death certificate. There were also questions about medical decisions that were delayed or not made because of his refusal to engage. It was a messy, complex legal situation, but for now, the fraud charge was enough to hold him. I saw his mugshot online. The handsome, charming architect was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed, unshaven man with a haunted, terrified expression. He looked broken, but I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. The unveiling was complete. The perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect grief, it had all been a lie. And now the truth in all its ugly, brutal glory was out for the world to see. I had gotten the truth. I had gotten my revenge. But as I sat in that quiet guest room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I had to face the terrifying question of what came next. The world loves a good villain, and Michael Davenport was tailor-made for the role. The media frenzy was relentless, a piranha-like swarm that stripped every detail of our lives down to the bone. Our wedding photos holiday, snaps my baby shower pictures. They were all repurposed as exhibits in the public trial of my husband. Each smiling image was now imbued with a sinister irony. Look at the happy couple just months before he let their baby die. I remained sequestered at Mark and Sarah's, a voluntary prisoner in their suburban guest room. They were magnificent, acting as gatekeepers against the world. They fielded calls from reporters, deflected nosy neighbors, and kept me supplied with tea and tissues. Sarah would sit with me for hours, not pressing me to talk, just offering a solid, comforting presence against the tsunami of chaos. My grief for Caleb had transformed. The murky, undefined sorrow of losing a stillborn child was replaced by the sharp, specific agony of mourning a son I never knew. I requested the full medical records from St. Jude's. They arrived in a thick manila envelope, and I read them with a forensic intensity. I learned his weight, 3 pounds, 2 ounces. His length, 15 inches. I read the nurse's notes, their neat professional script detailing his every struggle. Infant exhibiting respiratory distress. Apnea episodes increasing in frequency. Attempts to contact father unsuccessful. These clinical details were both torture and a strange kind of solace. They made him real. He wasn't just a phantom kick in my belly. He was a tiny person who had fought. The knowledge was a knife in my heart, but it was a real knife, not the phantom pain I'd been living with. I was no longer grieving a possibility. I was grieving a person. And with that came a new, focused anger. Not just at Michael, but at myself. How had I not known? How could a mother not feel on some primal cellular level that her child was alive? The guilt was a heavy cloak suffocating me. Michael denied bail due to being a flight risk, and the sheer public outrage languished in county jail. His high-powered family in Connecticut hired a top-tier legal team led by a shark of a defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, who immediately went on the offensive. Thorne's strategy was clear paint Michael not as a monster, but as a man who had suffered a profound psychological break. Mr. Davenport was under unimaginable stress. Thorne declared on the courthouse steps, his voice oozing sincerity. The impending birth, the pressures of his career, and a marriage that was already quietly fracturing led to a dissociative episode. He created a false narrative, not out of malice, but because his mind simply could not cope with the reality of his son's critical condition. This is not a case of fraud. It's a case of profound mental trauma. It was a brilliant, insidious defense. It attempted to reclaim the narrative of grief that Michael himself had so expertly woven. I watched the press conference on TV, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. A psychological break. He hadn't had a break. He'd had a plan. The emails to Jenna were proof of that. Speaking of Jenna, she had vanished. Her social media was deleted, her firm's website was offline, and her office was shuttered. The press couldn't find her. But the police did. She was located in a luxury spa resort in Arizona, having fled Chicago the day the story broke. They brought her back to Austin for questioning. She was not charged with a crime, she had broken no laws, but she was a material witness, and facing the ruin of her career and the full force of public condemnation, she decided to save herself. She made a deal with the prosecutors for immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her deposition was leaked to the press, of course. Every sordid detail. She recounted how she and Michael had met, the thrill of their affair, their shared fantasy of a future together. And then she came to the part about the baby. According to Jenna, the pregnancy had been a crisis point. Michael had assured her he would leave me, but the baby complicated everything. Her version of events painted Michael as weak and indecisive a man, panicking as his carefully compartmentalized life began to converge. He told me the baby would trap him, her deposition read. He said that if the baby was born healthy, he'd never be able to leave. The guilt would be too much, the societal pressure too great. We were in the hotel in Chicago when Amelia went into labor. He was a mess. He kept saying, "This is a disaster. This ruins everything." The most chilling part of her testimony concerned the hours at the hospital. She admitted to going there to confront him, to demand he make a choice. And she described the moment he learned Caleb was alive, but critically ill. He came out of the delivery area, and his face was white, she stated. He said, "It's alive, but it's sick. They don't think it's going to make it." And then he looked at me, and I saw a look in his eye. It was cold, calculating. He said, this could be a way out, a clean break. He decided right then and there. He told me the plan he would tell Amelia the baby was stillborn. He said it would be kinder that way. A quick, tragic end, instead of weeks or months of false hope. He said it would let them grieve together, and then, when the time was right, they could go their separate ways. He said it was the only way to manage the situation without destroying everyone. Kinder. He had called this monstrous selfish deception an act of kindness. He had appointed himself the arbiter of my grief, the editor of my reality, to facilitate his escape into a new life. Jenna's testimony destroyed Marcus Thorne's psychological break defense. This wasn't a man unmoored from reality. This was a man executing a premeditated, cold-blooded plan. The fallout from Jenna's deposition was a second explosion ripping through what little was left of our social circle. People were forced to take sides. My side was easy: the wronged wife, the grieving mother. His was impossible. His friends, his colleagues, even some of his family publicly disavowed him. He was utterly alone. One evening, Mark came into the guest room, a grim look on his face. "You got a letter," he said, holding it out as if it were contaminated. "From him. It was sent here from his lawyer." I took it from him, my hand steady. I hadn't heard a single word from Michael since I'd left. No calls, no texts, no emails. Just the public pronouncements of his lawyer. I slit the envelope open. The letter was written on a piece of yellow legal paper, his familiar architectural script looking alien and obscene. "Amelia, I know you will never forgive me. I don't expect you to. I don't forgive myself." Listening to Thorne talk in court, listening to what Jenna said, it's like hearing about a stranger, a monster. I don't know who that man was. The pressure, the lies, it all just avalanched. I was suffocating and I made a choice. A terrible, unforgivable choice. I see his face now, Amy. The nurses at St. Jude's, they showed me a picture. After it was over. I wouldn't look at the time. I refused. But they put a photograph in my discharge file. I found it when I was looking for paperwork for Thorne. I've been looking at it every night here in my cell. He looked like you. He had your nose. I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. I destroyed our son. I destroyed myself. I know sorry is a pathetic, meaningless word. It's an insult. But it's the only one I have. Don't let this destroy you. Please. You are a good person. You deserved a good life, a good husband. You deserved to be Caleb's mother. And I stole that from you. Michael. I read the letter twice. There was no rage left in me. No fire. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. His apology, his self-pity, his supposed realization, it was all too little too late. It was the pathetic whimper of a man who had been caught. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for the consequences. He looked like you. He had your nose. The words were meant to be a bridge, a shared detail of our son. But all it did was highlight the chasm between us. He had a photograph, a picture of our son's face. And he had kept that from me, too. Another secret, another layer of his betrayal. I folded the letter neatly. I did not rip it up. I did not burn it. I placed it in the manila envelope with Caleb's medical records. It was just one more piece of evidence in the case file of my shattered life. The unraveling was almost complete. The lies had all been exposed. The villain had been caged, and the truth was a harsh, unforgiving glare. All that was left was the trial, and the daunting task of figuring out how to live in the scorched earth he had left behind. The trial of Michael Davenport was a spectacle. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the final act of a grim, nationally televised play. I was there for every moment, a silent, black-clad figure in the front row. I refused to let the media's portrayal of me as a fragile, broken victim define me. I needed to bear witness. I owed it to Caleb. Michael, clad in an ill-fitting suit, looked like a ghost. The charm and confidence that had once been his armor were gone, replaced by a hollowed-out resignation. He rarely looked at me. When our eyes did meet across the courtroom, his were filled with a desperate, pleading shame. I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. The prosecution, armed with the security footage, the emails and Jenna Reed's damning testimony laid out their case with brutal efficiency. They painted a picture of a cold, narcissistic man who viewed his own child as a complication to be managed. They called nurses from St. Jude's to the stand who testified through tears about baby boy Davenport's fight for life and their frustrating, futile attempts to get his father involved. He told me on the phone, "There's no point in me coming down there. It's a foregone conclusion." One veteran NICU nurse testified, her voice thick with contempt. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen parents in denial, in shock, in every state of grief imaginable. I have never, ever seen a parent so indifferent." The defense, hamstrung by Jenna's testimony, did their best to salvage the psychological break narrative, but it rang hollow. Marcus Thorne put a psychiatrist on the stand who spoke of narcissistic personality disorder and acute stress reactions. But under cross-examination, even he had to admit that Michael's actions, the meticulous lies, the cover-up, the manipulation of me demonstrated a high degree of planning and cognitive function, not a break from reality. The moment that will forever be seared into my memory was when the prosecution introduced the photograph of Caleb into evidence, the one Michael had mentioned in his letter. They had retrieved it from his files. An evidence technician projected it onto the large screens in the courtroom. And there he was, my son. He was so tiny, nestled in a tangle of wires and tubes. His skin was translucent, his eyes were closed, and his tiny chest was still. But he was beautiful. He was perfect. He had my nose, and a shock of dark hair, just like Michael's. A sound escaped my lips, a raw, guttural sob that I couldn't contain. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell utterly silent. In that moment, he was not baby boy Davenport, the tragic figure in a news story. He was Caleb, my Caleb, and the world was finally seeing him. I saw Michael crumple at the defendant's table, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. For the first time, his grief looked real, but it was a selfish grief. Grief for himself, for the life he'd lost, the man he'd failed to be. It had nothing to do with the tiny boy on the screen. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty. Guilty of felony fraud. Guilty of reckless endangerment. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, delivered the sentence a week later. She spoke directly to Michael, her voice dripping with scorn. "You did not just lie, Mr. Davenport," she said, her eyes boring into him. "You constructed an alternate reality of unimaginable cruelty. You weaponized your wife's grief and love for you to cover your own pathetic infidelities. You treated the life and death of your own son as an inconvenience to be managed. Your crime is not just against the state or the hospital. It is a crime against humanity, against the very definition of fatherhood. It is one of the most profound acts of narcissistic cruelty I have ever witnessed from this bench." She sentenced him to the maximum possible term, 10 years in state prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. 10 years. It was a harsh sentence for fraud, but it was clear the judge was sentencing the moral crime, not just the legal one. I walked out of the courthouse into a sea of cameras and reporters. I didn't stop. I just kept walking, Mark and Sarah flanking me like bodyguards. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been roaring in my head for months had finally subsided. It was over. The weeks and months that followed were a slow, painful process of rebuilding. I sold the house, the one with the beige walls and the nursery that had become a mausoleum. I couldn't bear to be in it another second. I took my half of the assets and moved into a small, bright apartment in a different part of Austin, a part of the city that held no memories of him. I legally changed my last name back to my maiden name, Amelia Shelton. It was a small act, but a significant one. I was no longer Amelia Davenport. That woman, the one who believed in the Pottery Barn fantasy, was gone. She had died with Caleb. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and grief. We talked about Caleb. We talked about Michael. We talked about the complex, tangled knot of my own guilt and rage. She helped me understand that I couldn't have known that I was the victim of a master manipulator, and that my body and mind, under the trauma of childbirth and what I believed was catastrophic loss, had been in survival mode. I never spoke to Michael again. His lawyers reached out regarding the divorce proceedings, which were swift and uncontested. He signed everything, gave me everything I asked for. It was his final futile act of penance. I heard through the grapevine that Jenna Reed had moved to another state, changed her name, and was attempting to start over forever, branded by her association with the case. I found I didn't have the energy to hate her. She was just another piece of wreckage in the blast zone of Michael's lies. My life now is quiet. It is small. I still work as a graphic designer, but I find my greatest solace in volunteering at a local animal shelter. The uncomplicated, unconditional affection of the abandoned dogs and cats is a balm to my soul. I have a framed copy of Caleb's photograph on my nightstand. It's the only picture I have of him, the one from the courtroom. I look at it every day. I tell him good morning and I tell him good night. I tell him about my day. I tell him that I love him. I am in my own quiet way, finally getting to be his mother. The grief for him will never go away. It has become a part of me, a shadow that walks beside me. But it is no longer an all-consuming darkness. Sometimes it is even a source of strength. It reminds me of what is real, of what is important. It reminds me of the devastating cost of lies. I don't know if I will ever trust anyone fully again. I don't know if I will ever remarry or have more children. The future is not a bright, shining path anymore. It is a quiet, winding road, and I am taking it one step at a time. I have survived the unimaginable. I have walked through the fire of the ugliest of truths and come out on the other side. I am scarred. I am changed. But I am still here. And in the quiet of my new life, for the first time in a very long time, that feels like enough. The story of Amelia and Michael is a harrowing reminder that sometimes the most devastating monsters are the ones sleeping right beside us, hidden behind a mask of love and concern. It's a story about the corrosive power of lies and the unimaginable depths of betrayal. But it's also a story of survival of a woman who walked through an inferno of public humiliation and private agony to reclaim her own truth and find a way to honor the son who was stolen from her twice. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. More importantly, leave a comment below. What part of Amelia's story resonated with you the most? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story that peels back the layers of the human experience and reveals the truth, no matter how shocking it might be. Thank you for listening.